AgWeek Weather is sponsored by Bremer Bank. Connect with a banker today at bremer.com.
Will the region have favorable weather for Labor Day weekend? Here's John with our Agri-weather outlook.
As the calendar turns on in through September, we're still dealing with what I would call at this point a row crop drought. And by that, what I mean is that all this heat in late August and the continued warmer than average weather into at least the early part of September is creating much more evaporation than is average. And the corn and the beans and other row crops, there's still plenty of time before harvest time for them to get an extra drink and they could use the water. All right. Warm start to the fall and the month of September, although I do anticipate some change to this around the middle of the month of September, which would be toward the end of this 2-week outlook. Let's start out by looking at the weather patterns. Jet stream has, you'll notice the big feature is the ridging in the center of the country. Some of this is some very hot weather, and that will gradually subside southward as we go through the week, but it's going to remain fairly warm. There'll be a little bit of a cool down in the northern plains early to midweek, but it will not be much of a cool down as warm temperatures as in 80s will likely build back into North Dakota, Minnesota. Most of the mid sections of the country will remain quite hot and we're finally getting a little bit of warm weather into the northeast. There are some cool temperatures dropping down through the spine of the Canadian Rockies, and it continues to be very cold up around Hudson Bay. And we're getting some occasional cold weather up into parts of Alaska and the Yukon. That is likely as we head toward the second week of this forecast. That cold weather up north will begin to expand, which it typically does at the end of August and the start of September. Meanwhile, the weather pattern will likely remain mostly quite warm in the middle, with surges of pretty warm temperatures coming up into the nation's midsection. However, toward the end of the period here, and by that I'm talking about the middle of September, I am anticipating a bit of a switch toward troughiness, and that would bring at least an end to the warm weather pattern for the north and maybe bring down some cool weather. But as this is at the end of the 2-week period, I'm really hesitant to predict that this will be the start of a flip or a switch to a colder weather regime. Frankly, I doubt it. I suspect this is more of just either a temporary adjustment or a modest longer-term adjustment, not like a big switch to cold weather. About as far as precipitation goes, not much for the middle this week. That dome of high pressure still basically in charge. There will be some tropical moisture at times coming up through the mid-south. Many areas up around Hudson Bay are not only cool but quite wet, and there will likely be areas of rain and snow in the far northwest. California mostly dry. Not a lot of switch to the second week of the pattern. Still the midsection of the country for the most part, mostly just warm and dry.